benefits that the intervention provides is that it offers the rebels a booster in terms of morale. It will also lead to a heightened rate of defections amongst the Gaddafi regime, especially his inner circle. This will facilitate efforts to peel them away from him, and it will also protect the civilians in an effective manner by having Article 4 offers the potential for military strikes, as all necessary means will be taken in order to protect the civilians. So there can be strikes if there's, for example, a column of armoured tanks approaching Benghazi. That would be struck. The West can also strike the regime's communications in order to turn in the fog of war in on the regime, in order that it will erode its command structure and it won't at all be able to interfere with the rebels' efforts to coordinate their attacks.
The resolution did authorise all necessary measures, including air attacks, to prevent Gaddafi's forces attacking his own citizens. And so that implies that, quite apart from a no-fly zone, that the way is clear legally for Allied aircraft perhaps to attack some elements of Gaddafi's forces. Now, that is a different military proposition altogether and raises a number of problems. If we're talking about the activities other than a no-fly zone as such that the Allies might engage in, the things that will make the most difference, of course, is not stopping Gaddafi's aircraft flying, because he's not flying very many aircraft, but actually doing something about the artillery and the armour on the ground. Those are the battle winners that Gaddafi has. He doesn't have that many troops involved, but he does have armour and he does have artillery, which is doing the damage. So if the Allies were either prepared to attack those assets or cut off his supply lines, then that could make, some considerable difference. But Gaddafi is not stupid, and he knows that if Allied aircraft begin to attack him on the ground, almost certainly he will place his armour and his artillery in areas where civilians will also be at risk. And like all air operations, there is always a danger of creating civilian casualties, and then the whole thing becomes fraught and difficult to maintain politically. So one's got to wonder, what can the Allies effectively do that does not draw them into the civil war in a way that is the end of a slippery slope? They might try to bomb his air bases. They might try to cut his supply lines in areas that where civilians don't live, simply to actually get at his fuel supplies, his ammunition supplies. And there's quite a lot that they could do, of course, with covert action. We know that there are teams of special forces on the ground. Ground troops are not authorized by the UN Security Council resolution. Nevertheless, military activity, which contributes to air activity, may be regarded as just about legal, and there's quite a lot that can be done there. The most important thing is to isolate Gaddafi back in Tripoli, because this war will be won and lost by what happens ultimately in Tripoli. And if the possibility of military action and the reality of some military action has the effect of disheartening his troops, which shouldn't be too difficult, of disheartening the people around him, which may be more difficult but will be decisive, then military action could actually bring an end to this particular civil war.
There will not be any need for a ground force intervention because, firstly, the West doesn't want to be embroiled in a potential protracted civil war. Secondly, the rebels themselves have explicitly declared that they don't want Western ground troops. What there can be, though, is a limited number of special forces on the ground that are offering logistical support to the rebels. They can offer the rebels training in heavy artillery, because they have heavy artillery in Benghazi, but they're not particularly adept in using it effectively.
One of the images which everyone wants to avoid is that with this Arab awakening, with a democratic movement fighting for democracy in Libya, that becomes another Western intervention in a Middle Eastern country, in an Islamic country. By and large, that's regarded as a last resort. And I suspect that the West would actually see this rebellion crushed rather than get involved on the ground. But having said that, this UN resolution is surprising. It's surprising that it is quite so strongly worded, and we are now into unknown territory. But as of this week, that's a firm prediction. As of